Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest, Tiffany Duong, who's a former lawyer and now a writer, explorer, inspirational speaker. Tiffany, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Richard. I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks. Well, let's see. I want to definitely talk about how you obviously got out of law, but let me actually take back and let's start with actually how you got into it in the first place, or what drew you to it, and what was your experience with being a lawyer?
Absolutely. So I grew up in the Bay Area in California with a lot of, like hippie roots, tree hugging kind of vibes, very, aware of what was happening with our planet. And then I went to UCLA for undergrad, and I knew I wanted to do something environmental, but I wasn't sure what that was going to be. So I thought law school would be a really great way to gain a useful skill set while also giving my environmental career some strong legs.
Well, it seems like a logical thing. So you went to law practice, and how was it?
I loved the impact of our work. I was a renewable energy project finance lawyer. So I used to, help negotiate and write contracts to get those really cutting edge, huge solar farms, solar thermal, like top of the line, big global renewable energy projects up and running. But I hated the lifestyle. I was pretty miserable, and I felt very distant from my work and from the impact.
Was this at a time when solar was just getting going in the early days, or solar was already pretty big when you were doing this?
I'd say it wasn't the very, very beginning, but it was still on the up.
Yeah.
So it was still really fresh, and we were still figuring things out. It wasn't as affordable or as well worked out as it is today. So there was still a lot of struggle. There was more pushback, but we had some great tax incentives in place that encouraged the industry and the economy that way.
What is it as a kid or whatever you mentioned that you were drawn to the environment? What was it? Were you just like the outdoors? Were your parents really into the environment? What drew you into that?
No, my parents weren't particularly outdoorsy. Like, we went camping, things like that. I actually think it was a school assembly in 6th grade. I remember somebody coming in and telling us about the Amazon, and it was like a Save the Amazon campaign. And, they were describing like, oh, you'll have a poison tree frog here and a boa constrictor there and a jaguar lurking. And I didn't know places like that existed. Like, it was the first time anyone had told me the story about a place that didn't look like Silicon Valley. And I was hooked. And, ever since then, I imagined myself being that person who was chained in front of the wrecking ball, saving the Amazon, being a little bit wild and really a defender of our wild places. And that's really carried through to my work.
So tell me, so you're practicing law, you're drafting renewable energy contracts. It's kind of interesting, but it's a grind. So tell me how you gonna get out of that mold, because that's not, most lawyers kind of do that, but maybe they're not that happy, but they're doing it for years and years and years.
Absolutely. I mean, I did it for 6 years, which in lawyer land is actually still pretty short. For me, it felt like forever. And then I remember during that segment of my life, I used to live for, the 2 hours after work, or my 2 weekend days, 2 weeks of vacation a year. I just felt like the real me was when I was off work. And so I used to do lots of fun and crazy things to feel more alive, because I wasn't getting that from work. And one of those was scuba diving. And so, one night in the office when I was alone and chugging through, a 300-page contract and just kind of miserable, I signed up for an impromptu trip to the Galapagos. And like a month and a half later, I found myself there, and it was probably above my skill level as a diver at that time. But my instructor who was on the trip said, you can handle it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to trust you. And it ended up changing the entire course of my life.
What was it about the trip that did that? And what, tell me about that.
Sure. I found myself on the bow of the boat at 3 a.m. sobbing like my entire soul out. And it wasn't a sad sob. It was that I felt so alive there in a way that I forgot I could feel. Like I felt more alive in that one moment and more at home, like on planet Earth, than I had in 10 years. You know, if you count law school and practice and all that, it had been a decade since I had felt that alive. And I was grateful to have found my way back to that feeling.
So it was just an inspirational moment. And when you say sobbing, you mean literally tears?
Sobbing, like ugly cry, sobbing at 3 a.m. Like everyone else is asleep, getting ready to dive the next day. And I'm just standing there, and like, you can imagine, like the ship is going at night. There's like dolphins that are jumping the bow, even at night, that you can hear and sort of see. There's bioluminescence in the water. There's stars. It's just like, it's magic. It looks kind of like Life of Pi. You know, there's like the one scene where like the whale jumps. It felt that epic.
Interesting. And it's something you'd never experienced before, never felt that way before.
No, I think the remoteness of the Galapagos, and if you're a diver, you'll know it's on everyone's bucket list to go to the Galapagos. So just the remembering that there's like magic in the universe, right? Going, and it was day one of diving, and I was just like, wow, we have this whole week ahead of us where we might see a whale shark, we might see whales, we could see mantas, and the serendipity of what was in front of me for that week, and just like getting to be fully present, was something I hadn't had in a really long time.
So that was, so that was at the beginning. You had this inspirational at the beginning of the trip.
Yes.
And did the trip live up to that, you know, that experience or that feeling?
It's not so much like what I saw. It wasn't like ticking off, you know, a list of like, ooh, saw this. It was the feeling behind it, right? The intention behind it. I think, especially when you're going through law school and climbing a corporate ladder, the steps are laid out in front of you, right? They've been trodden by generations of people, and you know exactly what you need to do to succeed. And with something like a dive trip in a place as wild as the Galapagos, there's not a ladder, you know, there's not even a wall to hang the ladder on. And it was just the first time I remembered that in a really long time. So it felt, you know, as cheesy as it is, like the ocean was my oyster.
Oh, interesting. So then what? So you have this moment, you have this experience, you come back, you quit your job, or what happens then? Like, you don't just, what happens after that?
Yeah, so I was toying with the idea of not leaving. I was so happy and so in tune with a version of myself I thought I'd lost. So I was like, do I get on another liveaboard right after? Do I just like stay here? Do I want to become a dive instructor? You know, these were like my breakfast thoughts. And I was really by myself that trip. I went with no friends on the trip that I knew. So it lent itself to a lot of introspection. And so I was journaling a lot and all this. And then eventually I decided to get back on the plane. But when the airplane touched back down in LAX in LA, I made a vow to myself. I distinctly remember, like, as I felt the wheel touch down, I was like, you have to promise nothing will be the same. Like, we're not getting off this airplane if you don't promise yourself nothing will be the same. And so I decided to quit. I ended up putting in notice probably like a month after that. With no plan ahead, no job lined up, anything. I decided to move to Rio de Janeiro at the end of that year, and to travel to Asia before then to visit my mom in Singapore, and just kind of learn how to feel alive again, learn what inspires me, and really give myself a chance to try a bunch of new things.
And how long ago was this?
2015.
Okay, so it's been 7 years or so.
Yes.
What are some of the things you've done in those 6.5, 7 years?
Everything that makes me excited. It's been the best ride. So I got to travel a lot that first year. As I said, I went to Asia. My mom was based in Singapore at that time. We spent 2 months kind of just traveling around, slow traveling, really getting a feel of life. And then I went to Rio, and I stayed there for 4.5 months, volunteering with different nonprofits, local nonprofits, and learning, the Brazilian way of life, which is beautiful. If you've never tried it, it's incredible. And then I went to the Amazon rainforest to try field work, because I had always, when I was, in my concrete jungle, I'd always dreamed of like, oh, I should have been a marine biologist or an explorer or something. So I thought, why not just try? So I went to the Amazon. We were there for a month and a half, and it was as wild as you can imagine, and I remember thinking how I had found a haphazard way to go back to my childhood dream of being a rainforest defender, right? And I wasn't in front of a bulldozer, but I was helping all these scientists and conservationists protect virgin rainforest, which was pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. So what about, have you written a book? Do you do speaking now? What are some of the other things you do now?
Sure. So when I came back, I dove really hard into everything oceans. I knew that the oceans had saved me, and I felt a true debt to raise awareness for what was happening and to learn as much as I could and share it on every platform I could. So I got really into fishing, like overfishing policy. I helped lobby against some of those, like more unsustainable fishing practices. I became a scientific diver. Now I teach kind of the intersection of climate and oceans at University of Miami extension classes, and I'm a guest speaker pretty often there. So I speak from South Florida, where I'm based, because it really is the forefront of climate change and oceans, like with sea level rise and everything. I speak there pretty often, and I do Zoom classes. I haven't written a book yet. I would love to, but I write a lot of ocean news and stories. So I write for PADI, the scuba diving agency. I write for Scuba Diving Magazine, Eco Watch, which is an international news source, and a variety of other outlets, really on like everything oceans and climate and how we can try to save both.
Mm-hmm. Well, I realize you didn't plan it this way, but obviously your timing could not have been better. I mean, obviously now this is of paramount importance, and you're in the space. I mean, that also, I'm sure that hasn't hurt at all either. No,
oceans are super hip right now, which is great.
Yeah.
And I feel lucky to be, in the space and to get the opportunity to meet the smartest people really working on the problems of our age, and to get to share their message with the broader public. I think it's such a privilege and a joy for me.
How much scuba diving do you do now?
I probably get out once every month and a half, which is pretty low for the Keys where I live. We basically can wake up every morning and be like, yeah, I want to go diving today, which is part of the reason I decided to make it a home base. But it's way more than I ever did before.
So you've been doing this now for 7 years, about the same amount of time you were practicing lawyer. Anything you know about that? Do you think there's any way to kind of combine these two in some way in the future? What do you think?
I don't plan on going back into legal practice, but now being far enough removed, I definitely see how the skills that I learned in law are facilitating what I do now. And I'm very appreciative of that. Like, law teaches you, the importance of every minute detail, like a comma can cost somebody, $1,000, whatever, if you misplace a comma. So that really intense attention to detail and being able to go through large bodies of research and language to cull a single point. That's exactly what I do with, journalism, with storytelling, right? I hear the whole big story and I pull out the pieces that I need. So it's a soft combo, but I don't right now have plans to officially do law again.
It seems like this was you would inevitably get to this place. Do you feel that that's true, or you think it was really serendipitous that you happened to take this trip and that's what, compelled you to make this change?
I feel like the luckiest person ever. I don't think it did not at any point in my journey feel like it was going to lead here. I didn't even know what I'm doing existed as a job. I didn't know you could get paid to do these kinds of things, you know, back when I started. So I very much feel like it was a lucky shot on my part, but I also know that's because I'm putting myself in the right, you know, places and situations to talk to people and figure out different ways to share the message.
What are you hoping to do in the future? What are your sort of future goals with what you're doing?
I want to bring the message bigger and broader. So bigger platforms, bigger publications, books, you name it, and really tell the story in a way that is a bit more uniting than it is now. I feel like, especially the current political climate conversations, and especially around climate change, are so divided that we're stalling on effort that needs to happen yesterday. So I would love to be part of how we can bring people together about these critical topics, because they will affect everyone.
Tell me a little about the intersection between, you know, climate change, which is a broad topic, obviously affects a lot of different things, and, you know, the oceans. Like, is it, you know, tell me a little, just, you know, I want to go into exhaustive detail, but I'm just kind of curious exactly what the sort of connection is between oceans and climate change.
Of course. Thanks for asking. So climate for me is the giant elephant sitting on top of the planet. Like, if we don't solve it, nothing else will matter. That said, I think that climate activists and ocean lovers don't realize they're fighting the same fight. So like, the oceans have acted as a huge carbon sink, the same way that forests do. They take in a lot of carbon, they have historically, but they're pretty much maxed out. And the consequence of that for the ocean is ocean acidification, which, you know, we've heard little bits about, but it's hard to distill down in a way that's popularly comprehensible. So we've got ocean acidification and warming ocean temperatures as really the two huge consequences of putting more carbon in the air. What that does in the ocean is, you know, it does things like cause starfish to melt, and, you know, icebergs, you know, to melt, sea levels to rise, storms to intensify, things like that, that we're not necessarily connecting. And then for the climate, you know, you run out of carbon sinks, and then we're just going to get hotter faster.
But then there's also other problems with the ocean not related, right? Like, isn't there too much plastic in the ocean? There's probably other things in the ocean that are not necessarily related to climate change, right? That need to be fixed.
Of course. I mean, there's a myriad of problems, like overfishing, all that. They are all somewhat tied. Like plastics are, you know, petroleum based. So we are using fossil fuels to make plastic. So it is backdoor tied. But yes, there are so many problems. That said, I do truly believe that if we can't stop this runaway, you know, train of the climate change, the other problems are second tier. So we've really got to put more emphasis and focus on that first level problem.
And what are you doing in terms of trying to get the word out and, you know, building a platform? What are some of the things you're trying to do? So
I recently was just accepted as an op-ed fellow in partnership with the Yale Center on Climate Change. And it's an amazing program. It's in its third year, and they basically train us for a whole year with leading journalists to learn how to storytell about the climate better. So it is a wonderful opportunity I'm really excited about. And they're going to help us publish work op-eds about, you know, exactly this idea, like, what can we do? So for me, aside from just, you know, general sharing of knowledge and teaching, I think it's helping people understand how the oceans and the climate affect them. You know, even if you live in the middle of the city or in the middle of the country or in a place that's far away that you feel like isn't connected, everything you do really is tied. So I work to do that just on my own platforms and in everything I write by making those little minute connections.
Have you thought about trying to get some law firms to sponsor you? Because they're always trying to, you know, look for good causes. I mean, I know it's the kind of a little bit of an odd kind of sponsor, but, you know, have you thought about that?
I haven't thought about law firms directly. I think I'm still, emotionally, it still feels like almost like an X. So I'm like dancing around it, but I know it's a great avenue. I've talked to a couple bigger companies, that are trying to better themselves, which is great, but not yet, but maybe in the future.
Well, Tiffany, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed speaking with you. I've interviewed a lot of ex-lawyers, and yours is definitely one of the most interesting stories. I'd love to check in with you in a few years and just see what you're up to.
For sure. I would love that so much.
This is Richard Hsu and Tiffany Duong. Thanks.